Cut the dang music. What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday. Hope you're great. I hope today is a nice day for you. We had 2 straight days of like beautiful sun and amazing weather. And then today it looks like it's going to be rainy on and off, 75, 80 degrees, but cloudy pretty much the whole day. That's overcast and kind of shitty looking. So me and Jill are still going to get at it. We're going to probably like take a nap around 3 o'clock and watch a movie. That's like the plan, the tentative plan. And then after that, we're going to probably hit a place called Ditka's for dinner, just on the outskirts of the city in Pittsburgh here. Because tonight is a salad night for me, because last night was a B-dubs night. So we've got to get the vegetables in and some fiber. So I'm excited about that. Listen, I get repeated emails about Cypionate because that's the most popular ester. And one of the most popular questions is, what is the best dose? And I think that people have to think about it in a different way. Because first of all, whatever dose may work for Joe may not work for you. People metabolize testosterone profoundly differently, I've seen over the years. Some folks will, on a 130 milligram dose, split up into 2 injections per week, go to 1,200, and others will be at 700, 800. So that certainly depends. I think what people need to look at is, rather than trying to identify what the consensus best dose is, you would want to look instead at what dose gives you a state in which you cross an androgenic threshold where specifically erections work really well, but particularly at nighttime, right? Because that is happening without your conscious control. So a good gauge for if the machinery for erections, which is DHT based, works, are nocturnal erections. The rest of it you can dial in via modulating the rest of the metabolites, mainly estradiol. If you've got erections at nighttime, but you don't have erections in the day, that's the point in which once you've found that androgenic threshold crossing dose, where you've got to modulate estradiol usually, or pay close attention to your blood work throughout the effect duration window of your injection period so that you can actually look at what the ratios are doing on day 3 versus day 6. If you've got great erections and great libido on day 1, day 2, day 3 of your 7-day injection period, and then on day 4, day 5, day 6, they start to slowly decline, what are your ratios looking like? Estradiol tends to kind of lag behind in terms of its peak. So do you end up in a ratio of kind of lower end androgens toward the trough with estradiol still a little elevated, and that's messing with things? Again, the TDE ratio, this is one of the things that confuses me when I'm very clear that people should be looking at the DHT to estrogen ratio as one of the major drivers of either success or failure on TRT. The testosterone to estradiol ratio is very heavily studied in the clinical literature. It's very heavily publicated and discussed. So I really don't know why we've gotten away from looking at that. And what TDE really means is DHT to estradiol, because though testosterone via some nitric oxide signaling, among other things, has some effects at the penile vasculature in terms of erectile quality, it's mainly DHT. So, you've got to find that dose that crosses the androgenic threshold, and then you dial the rest of it in otherwise by looking at the bloods, tuning the protocol in a way which favors the CNS side of libido, which almost always has to do with estradiol and injection frequency. And in rarer cases, neurosteroids, gonadotropin support with things like HCG, and then going from there. Was there anything else that I wanted to talk about here? Not really. I covered the androgenic threshold. I mean, this is so important to folks, and this is the thing that I've seen over and over, especially over the last 6 months. I'm just seeing it more. Listen, I generally now have a bias toward a good degree of individuals, and I can't speak for everyone, nor will I make blanket statements, needing higher amounts of testosterone than we had previously believed, or that I had even previously believed. We're all still learning about TRT. I don't think there's a single person out there that can call themselves an actual bona fide expert on it. Everybody just has their own specialty and things that they've focused a lot on. Like I've focused mainly on sexual function. That's really all I focus on. I'm not really a specialist in hematocrit, et cetera. And other stuff, but I can tell you for sure that the androgenic threshold is an important concept for people to keep in mind, especially relative to erections. and that there are a good degree of people, for fear's sake, for limitations, constraints from their doctor's sake, among other reasons, that are just not getting enough testosterone. They've tried in the past. The H&H went super high. Usually indicates you're an unhealthy person. You've got to do something about that. And some of those cases, injecting less frequently actually helps H&H. If you think about how red blood cells get produced over time and how therefore H&H rise, it's a very slow rise, right? So this happens over time. But if you peak and trough and give yourself some time where you're not exposed to constant level androgens, you're ultimately going to have lower levels of hematocrit. I think that is a very plausible position. So there's all kinds of things that go into it. All right. One thing I wanted to quick mention to you folks is that the 50% off on coaching ends tomorrow. So tomorrow's Sunday, and you have one day to do it. We have booked 5 of the 7 slots that were open, so there's still 2 more. So anyone that wants to book can go book. But once Sunday comes, it's going to be 11:59 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow night. That discount code will just be deleted, and then we'll run it again next summer or next spring. We only run the 50% off coaching once a year, possibly twice a year, but it's usually once every 9 or so months. So that's going away tomorrow. So if you need to book coaching at 50%, you can do that. All the consults will still be there. We're starting with a super chat. So thank you, Jordan Gene. I haven't seen you in a while, bro. Hope you're doing great. Been on a test prop HCG Proviron protocol for a year at least. It's great. One issue: main daily injection spots, ventral glutes and quads get knots. Any advice? Do less injections? No, I wouldn't try doing that, because then you run the risk of messing everything up if you're already dialed in. I mean, the common stuff that people suggest: take your vial, take a coffee mug and put some warm water in it, preferably some hot water, let it cool down a little bit, and then put the vial in it. Let it sit for 5 minutes before you inject, and that may help the PIP. These knots, I would have to look at what size injection needle that you're using. I don't even really know if there is a better, whether it's 5/8 inch or an entire inch or an inch and a half, that might be better for PIP relative to test prop. So it's a hard one, man. It's honestly a hard one. There are folks that say over time their body gets used to, the PIP. Mine never did. I've never dosed prop for a year straight or even 6 months straight, but I've had 4-month runs with it. And the post-injection pain never really got all that much better. I can tell you that, if you're injecting intramuscularly, it's probably the best you can do. You put it sub-Q, it's going to all be worse. Yeah. You could try icing the injection sites, a few times a week, and trying to reduce some of that local inflammation and see if that helps. But otherwise, prop is highly volatile in that regard. I mean, the compounds in it, the solvents, how it's made, they cause post-injection pain. It's a very, very notorious outcome of dosing testosterone propionate. So sometimes trade-off. If it was me and I couldn't dial in any otherwise with other protocols, or had a hard time dialing in, but this prop protocol worked, I would just fucking eat it and stick with it unless it's debilitating. Thank you for the super chat, bro. Big Z Baller. What's up, dude? What's the best time to take an AI in 200 milligram once a week, 1 day or 3 days after injection? This is the way that I think about this, and I think the half-lives, so the half-life of a anastrozole in this particular case, as well as the pharmacokinetics of your estradiol via a cypionate injection, suggest that day 3 to day 4 is an opportune time to take an AI if you need one. Only if you need one. If you're doing infrequent injections, you tend to again trough back down, so you stay in reasonable ratios of DHT to estradiol, so it's not needed all the time. But if you are going to take one, you ought to just think about dosing the aromatase inhibitor when estradiol is peaking, which would be day 4 or so. That's effectively when it starts to get to its peak, after which it starts to trail off. You want some of that estradiol to support cardiovascular, joint tissue, brain tissue, etc., and to ensure that you have enough libido per the androgens that you're injecting. So, taking it on the day of injection or the day after injection, if the interest is not to crush estradiol, taking an AI right when you inject is not a good idea because you're already at trough on everything. Then you're going to lower the estradiol more. Estrogen doesn't peak in substantial manner in one day. It peaks over the effect duration window and then starts troughing toward the latter end of it. So, day 3, day 4 is a good strategy for both DHT derivatives in these cases or AIs if you need to manage estradiol. But, your logic for determining whether or not you need to manage estradiol needs to be pretty on point. You've got to look at what are the commonalities in those states where estradiol may have an inhibitory effect at the erectile tissue relative to the rest of your protocol. And that's usually when libido is still good, but erection quality is suffering. But you've crossed your androgenic threshold or you have enough androgens to support erectile quality, but somehow it's being inhibited. The forums are riddled with people. Forget about my coaching experience and my own personal experience, but the forums are riddled with people that are never dialed in. They've taken the pro-estrogen camp's advice to not manage it, to not look at it, to not think about it, to look at all the benefits of estradiol and assume that just scales indefinitely, which is absurd. And they never got dialed in on TRT. And then the moment they microdosed anastrozole, then their erections came back, their libido came back, and they were dialed in on TRT. So, just something to think about, brother. Liv Paklani. I know I didn't say that right. But thank you for the question. Brother, hey, Ryan, I'm a PFS guy. My protocol is 80 milligrams test sip every 4th day. Okay, not so bad. 10 milligrams master on propionate per day, not so bad. Any thoughts on this protocol on paper? No, I think it looks okay. So you're running 70 milligrams of masteron a week. It's a little high on the masteron considering you're only at 140 week a test. And the only reason I say that is because you just want to be careful not to reduce the estrogen signaling to the point where you have loss of libido. If you've not gotten your libido back on PFS after having PFS yet, then, and if it's not back now, this protocol is not for you. Yeah. With post-finasteride syndrome and even PSSD, if you've got the right ratios of hormones and the right protocol, your libido should start to come back relatively quickly. It may take time to perfect that and for things to work over time. But if this isn't working at the moment for libido, it's probably a bad protocol. Yeah. At the same time, based on how people aromatize and how prominent their estrogenic signaling is, and in this case, the primary mechanism of finasteride is to make you over-convert to estradiol and under-convert to DHT via blocking 5-alpha reductase isoenzymes. You're then in a place where you probably have to manage the estrogen if your numbers still skew toward that bias of more estrogen conversion versus DHT conversion. We don't really know why that happens. I think the most plausible mechanism there is impairment of 5-alpha reductase isoenzymes in some fashion, but it hasn't really been studied, so we don't know. But on paper that looks fine, but all that nuance is where you're gonna get your answers. Methylene blue and hangover are a good combo. Really? Interesting. Yeah, I to be honest with you, the last time I was hungover was probably about 3-4 years ago, and I've just hated it every time I've been hungover. I fucking hated it more and more and more to the point where I just won't drink past a certain threshold. So, in that time, however, nothing worked, nothing except for waking up, having coffee, trying to do a little bit of work, getting my ass to the fucking gym, working out hard, coming back and eating a big meal, and then taking about an hour nap. After which I felt relatively normal, but not 100%. That's the only thing that ever worked for me. There are solutions out there, shit you can drink and all this stuff that might be useful for hangovers, but I've not found a solution for that. So my solution was to not drink to the point where I have a hangover. It's profoundly unhealthy anyway. Will Franco, what's up, brother? Does 200 milligrams of Cypionate need to be once a week? No, not necessarily. Or could I get the same benefits at 2x a week? Also, what are your thoughts about peptides like Montseer, Daily, NAD+? Not a huge peptide fan. I think that a lot of them are versatile and can do a host of things. They all have very obvious mechanisms of action and can be useful in different contexts. But regarding Cypionate, no, if you're dosing 200 a week, you do not need to dose it once a week. You can dose it twice a week, or you can dose 27 milligrams a day if you'd like. But the question really is, will it Number one, will it cross a threshold for you of androgens in total test, free test, DHT conversion, local DHT conversion at the penile tissue level that supports erectile quality? Because if it doesn't, then your 2x weekly 100 milligrams at a time is not going to work for you. You know, it just forever and ever you'll stay on that, and you won't get good erections if it's not crossing your androgenic threshold. This is why people on 200, as an example, doing 100 every 3.5 days and not getting the best effects in terms of erections and libido, will switch to 200 once every 7 days and give that 6 weeks, and then they've got much better erections and libido. Well, quantifiably, you're peaking higher on everything, and then you're going to trough back down, which is good. I mean, it supports what your body, how we function as daddies. We don't stay steady state in nanograms per deciliter of testosterone. If you actually study those curves, we fluctuate between 300 and 600 nanograms per deciliter. You know, those are the extremes. 600 is, but a 400 nanogram per deciliter swing for a natty is not unusual. It's not unusual. So, I mean, that's why those kinds of protocols tend to benefit people. Again, I'm not a huge fan of daily injections, particularly because crossing the androgenic threshold is harder. You will have to dose higher. You know, daily injections can work if you're dosing 35, 40 milligrams a day, if your androgenic threshold is right around 1,500 nanograms per deciliter total testosterone, which for some people it is. They've got to be not just supraphysiologic, but excessively supraphysiologic. So, I mean, if you want to go through the tedious act of, you know, pinning daily, puncturing your muscle daily, because you really shouldn't do sub-Q, in my opinion. It's highly understudied. Fine, you're probably going to have to dose high, and your steady-state estradiol, which again, you know, the proponents against this are saying, hey, look, the serum is not a surrogate for what's happening at the tissues. Okay, fine, true. Then the tissues do matter, right? So if you're exposed constantly to estradiol at your tissues, doesn't that matter? I feel like some of these people have not studied the way that estrogen receptor alpha and estrogen receptor beta function, where they're located in the penis, and how estrogen affects them. To me, it's, as a biohacker, these are the kind of things we look at. Whereas I think traditional medical doctors are very myopic in their thinking and tend not to look at those kinds of things for whatever reason. But no, listen, 200 milligrams once a week is rarely the same thing as 200 milligrams split up twice weekly. You'll have to find what makes sense for you. John Minkey. What's up, John? Love your content. What protocols do you recommend for men in their 60s? Well, I mean, the same thing applies. I think as you get older, you probably want to be a little more careful with H&H and things like that. And you obviously want to make sure that, you know, you're not dosing a TRT dose that is disturbing your blood pressure, you know, in any risky way. So with that in mind, I think 150 is a reasonable, 150 per week is a reasonable starting dose for someone in their 60s. I think people should try every different kind of injection frequency and see what makes sense for them. But again, I bias much toward less frequent injections for the reasons I've discussed. You know, keeping your DHT to estrogen ratio in the right place throughout the effectoration window, reaching enough of an androgenic threshold to actually make a difference. You know, so 150 to start would be reasonable. If you end up finding that you do better on infrequent injections, 150 may be enough to support you through the whole 7 days, or you may trough and feel pretty terrible on days 5 through 7, at which point you probably want to bump that up to like 170 and then run that again to see if you eventually balance out and feel good for the effectoration window of the injection. Ginger ale break. Oh, man. I love that stuff in the morning. I don't eat breakfast. Just a ginger ale. Jordan G unit uses a 5/8 inch per my suggestion. Don't get PIP, really. Just seems like a scar tissue and knot of sorts. Okay, understood. Some say massage the oil out. Yeah, ice, heat, and massaging. It does sort of go away if I leave one spot alone. Yeah, you're just going to have to honestly rotate. I know it's a bit of a pain in the ass. If it continues and you're really having a hard time with it, you just try dialing in on Cypionate instead. But Matt, yes. Not really sure how to say that. Going to hop on DHT anything on top of my TRT. Do you know how I can avoid getting my LDL and hematocrit up? Very sensitive to LDL, and I don't want to get my blood too thick. Well, DHT probably, will increase the hematocrit. Regarding the LDL, that's a hard one. DHT countering estradiol, which it does, is might be one of the mechanisms by which LDL would increase in this particular case. I think you should stick with all the health stuff. I think you should take any supplement that we know has positive effects on lipids via the scientific literature. One being D-limonene and the other being tocotrienols. I also think that you should do cardio at the very least a few times a week. Walking, jogging at the gym, jogging on a treadmill is incredibly useful. Cardio alone will, in my opinion, will make you live longer. If you study the blue zones, these are geographical areas in the United States within which they've got a rare subset of individuals that live to 100 plus. They call them centenarians. There's a small list of things that they all have in common, and one of them is they walk every day. They walk a lot. So walk, take tocotrienols, look into taking some D-limonene, maybe other lipid modulating compounds, and monitor it all throughout, and drink a lot of water to try to control some of that hematocrit. But at the same time, determine, do you really need DHT anything? Most people don't. It's very useful to have sometimes. If your balance between DHT and estrogen is just skewing in favor of estradiol, it's one of the reasons you can't get dialed in. A little bit of extra DHT can dial people in. I've seen that many times, especially the last 2 years since I started getting transdermal DHT, using it, studying it, and suggesting people listen to what I'm saying about it and having them go experiment on their own. JL Montaigne, what peaks first after injection, DHT or estradiol? Could you explain how both peak in time frames? Yeah, DHT test is peaking in the actual peak in your testosterone on a Cypionate injection, assuming that you're doing it once every 7 days, is right between the 2.5 and 3.5 day mark. Call it that to be as accurate as possible, while leaving a little bit of wiggle room for different bodies processing the pharmacokinetics of the ester. Estradiol is peaking between day 3 and day 5, with it usually peaking around day 4 and staying somewhat elevated, taking a little bit longer to clear. And then in those subsequent 2 days, pretty much everything's going downhill. But a lot of this stuff, like the estradiol and how it clears your body, it depends somewhat on your levels of glucuronidation and how you clear hormones from your system and stuff. You could accelerate things like that by using calcium D-glucarate, which inhibits that process. The process of recycling estradiol back in your system. So those are things to look at, but generally that's the time frame. This is one of the reasons why people will inject a dose of testosterone and the total weekly dose isn't the right dose for them in terms of the androgenic threshold. But the first 3 days of injecting that Cypionate dose does cross their androgenic threshold, after which they drop below it. So they have erections and libido for 3 days, and then they drop below it. You've dropped below your androgenic threshold. Can 13 picograms per milliliter estradiol give me photophobia or migraines? I feel like shit. No. Wait. 13 picograms per milliliter of estradiol? Yeah, potentially. Listen, all manner of fucked up shit is going to happen to you when you take the estrogen too low, especially if you've got high androgens. In some sense, estradiol kind of provides a buffer for your high androgens in terms of health. Again, this doesn't scale forever. This is it's the mistake that the pro-estrogen camp makes, because estrogen is useful in this and this way, means we can take it into oblivion. This is ridiculous. It doesn't apply to anything else in physiology, so why would it apply to estradiol? But yes, that low estradiol, I would feel pretty terrible. Yeah, I would feel fucking terrible. I'd be peeing out my brain. My brain's out. I don't think I'd be able to retain much water there. Estrogen itself, estradiol, is a pretty large contributor to your anti-diuretic hormone signaling, the quantity of ADH, potentially your aquaporins in your kidney. arginine vasopressin receptor activity. So that low, you're going to pee out a lot of your water. There's nothing really good about it. It'd be hard pressed to find a guy at 13 picograms per milliliter of estradiol with good libido. Probably will have, if there's enough DHT, good erections. But yeah, no, this is absolutely. I don't know if you took an AI and crushed it too low, but you don't want to be anywhere near 13 picograms per milliliter, generally speaking. So I am nursing a cold, so if I sound like I've got tissue stuck up my nose or a fucking elephant up my nose, then that's why. If 120 milligrams test E bolus injection gives me morning erections by day 3, 4. So this is an interesting topic. Let's talk about this. Then fades by day 5. What would you suggest I try next? I would suggest that the moment you're getting those erections, if it's repeatable that you get them on day 3, 4, run to Quest and LabCorp, go to discounted labs, buy total testosterone, the LCMS version, the more accurate version of total testosterone. You can look at your free test if you'd like, but you can use total as a surrogate for where things are going. Measure it there and then measure it when things fade. At least get a gauge for what your blood markers are doing when you are having erections. Yeah. At the same time, I think you should measure estradiol in each one of those phases as well, so that you can get that data too. It may not be the estradiol. It may be the estradiol. It's more likely in this case an androgenic threshold problem that on day 3, day 4, which is effectively right around your peak where you start plateauing, you then have enough androgenic signaling, think DHT at the corpus cavernosa, to have sufficient erections, and then things start fading. If your androgenic threshold is 1,400 nanograms per deciliter, you're probably crossing that at day 3, after which it goes down to 13 to 12 to 11, and then probably bottoms out at about 1,000, depending on how quickly you're clearing testosterone. It's an androgenic threshold matter. That's it. I mean, that's why I'm so keen on having you guys understand that threshold matters a lot and that you've got to be thinking about it. I know people that whatever injection frequency, whether once weekly, listen to this. I know people, these are clients, that no matter what injection frequency, whether once weekly, any way you split it up, at certain doses of testosterone, even going to 1,100 in total testosterone and slightly above range-free testosterone, don't have erections the whole time. No nocturnals. They need a lot of Cialis to make sex work. Their libido is pretty shit. You get them above a certain threshold of androgens and the erections come back. It's probably the same thing that's happening here. That's a pretty massively understudied part of TRT. Like, why is it that people are needing a lot more exogenous androgens than they would require endogenously to function in terms of erectile quality? Nobody knows. But it is definitely a real thing. In fact, I would argue that I would say this: there are some people for whom the benefits of TRT really don't make themselves present until they're in the 1,500 to 2,000 nanograms per deciliter range, which sounds fucking peculiar. It sounds dangerous, and it also sounds bad, but I think at this point we have enough evidence to suggest it is not bad. It is, in fact, good. Like, the benefits might scale up to a certain threshold the higher you go on dosing, as long as you are a healthy person. If your H&H is going high, you need to look at that. This is why blood donation is something that we do. Fantasy Fabio says, what a name, bro. A 50 milligram Cypionate shot will wreck my libido for the next 2 days, then rebound on day 3. 100 milligrams even longer, like 5 days before a rebound. Any ideas what this says about how my body reacts to Cypionate? It could be so many fucking things, man. Number one, I don't know what your bloods are saying, so that would be an important thing for you to note. When the libido and erections get back on day 3 or whatever that is, go test total testosterone, free testosterone, estradiol sensitive, and DHT. And then when libido and erections go away, test all those hormones again. That is your best shot at getting at least a data-based perspective on what may be going on here. At the same time, there are some counterintuitive things that would probably fix your problem, like taking 5 days off from any of these points and then injecting 200 or 250 and doing nothing for 7 days. At the same time, I don't know what your HCG dose is, so the HCG is profoundly estrogenic, and that can throw the ratios off significantly. And at the same time, as I alluded to in the beginning, you might just be in those windows out of balance in terms of DHT and estradiol, favoring estradiol over DHT, which would give you erectile dysfunction. I mean, that's just very, very clear. Again, I don't know why we've gotten away from this and why people are even questioning. Like when I discussed the DHT estrogen ratio, out there in the internet sphere, some people like refer to it as something that is inconsequential when the test to estrogen ratio has been highly fucking studied and referenced throughout the scientific literature regarding testosterone, sexual function, androgens for men generally for years upon years. So there's something to think about. 8-6. I've been injecting 100 milligrams MCT Cypionate into my stomach every 4 days. Running, if everything seems to be working. So you're doing 100 milligrams every 4th day. Okay. And you're doing that sub-Q and it's working. Okay. But you're running out of untouched spots on the stomach. Well, if you're doing this sub-Q, which is what it sounds like, there's no muscle mass really unless you're injecting your abdomen, which nobody suggests, then what you probably want to do is inject into your thigh, right around the vastus lateralis area. Just pinch some fatty tissue in your thigh and inject there. If you're lean, it's going to be harder to do, but you can do it. I suppose you can do a sub-Q injection in the glute, but yeah, I mean, you could. You could do that as well. Just find another place to do sub-Q. If sub-Q works, just do it. Again, I'm not a huge fan of it based on its kinetics, but it does work for some people. I guess that's the difference between me and some of the other TRT folks out there is that there are different strokes for different folks. I certainly have a bias towards certain things, but if sub-Q works for you, it works for you. I'm not going to deny you that. I'm not going to gaslight you. I hope folks are recognizing that, by the way. Yeah, you just asked this question, and yes, 13 picograms per milliliter can make you feel like dog shit. Yes. Yes. Yeah, if you switch to the glute and just pinch some fat in the glute, you shouldn't have any problems. Michael says he's a bit of a hyper responder. ED not so good. What every day or erectile dysfunction? Morning wood is there, but at 60 to 70%. Okay, yeah, that's either an androgenic threshold problem or too high estrogen for your androgens. Cialis does nothing at all for me. Currently switched from every other day to 3.5 days, 128 milligrams, 250 IU per week. Okay, I don't know what you're asking here, so if you want to phrase this question a little differently. Yeah, I would suggest, first of all, that's a low dose of testosterone, 128 milligrams a week. I wouldn't have erections there unless I was very tightly controlling estradiol. It's weird. When you go on the lower end doses, the ratios tend to be a little more skewed. This all depends on injection frequency, among other things, but I don't think the HCG is particularly problematic, but I think that you're probably a person that should try what we used to do, what plenty of people still do. In fact, actually most people. Do you know that most people doing TRT are injecting once a week? Most people. Yeah, that's actually most people. Now, there's a lot more doing frequent injections now because of the influence of the internet and that camp, et cetera. But there are people that have been on TRT for years beyond any of this that are just injecting once a week. So you might be one of those people. It's a perfectly reasonable protocol to inject 200 milligrams every 7 days. Perfectly reasonable protocol to do that. But you're not crossing an androgenic threshold is what I would suggest, or the estrogen's too high for your androgens. But at 128, you're probably not crossing the androgenic threshold. Yeah, I'd try more testosterone dosed infrequently, find the androgenic threshold, learn how to stay there. Then you can maybe do more frequent injections as long as your ratios don't get skewed and to facilitate staying around your androgenic threshold. E9Z, you recommend once a week Cypionate for the peak and trough. I don't recommend it to everybody. Again, I get these comments that go, like when I've been talking about higher doses and Cypionate once a week, and I had a guy repeatedly go, Mr. Flip-Flop, and then link to a video in which I might have been talking about like more frequent injections. I'm not talking to everyone. Like, don't make yourself look like such a fucking asshole that, you haven't seen every video that I've done, or at least a good degree of them, and you haven't paid attention to any of the conditional logic, I'm not suggesting you're doing that. I'm saying I don't recommend it for everyone. Rather than a weekly trough, why not daily trough with test cream instead? Isn't daily trough more natural? Technically, a daily trough more mimics the way that your body does it under normal conditions where gonadotropins are being secreted from the, pituitary, really the hypothalamus and GnRH, neuronal function and shit. But yes, it is much more akin to what you are doing naturally if you're using something like cream. But you can create the same kind of thing, i.e. peak trough, with testosterone cypionate doing infrequent injections. It's just not done daily. You're not creating that daily. I think you're just looking at it a little myopically. Like, why not a daily trough with test cream? I'll give you many reasons. Not everyone responds to test cream no matter what dose they're on. They're either too much converting to DHT. This is the biggest one. Too much converting to DHT, not enough to estradiol. I've seen guys at 1,200, 1,300 total test with 20 estradiol on cream, not using HCG. That's not a great balance. You probably need a little more estradiol there. At the same time, cream is highly DHT-centric and tends to cause hair loss in susceptible individuals, and even some non-susceptible individuals, meaning people that have relatively fine hair genetics. They're going to have hair follicle miniaturization. The subcutaneous tissue, the buffer, if you will, in the scalp is going to be reduced via that dihydrotestosterone, the AR binding, and their hair is going to become less healthy, and they're going to start losing it. So that's one of the reasons. Another major reason that some people don't do good on cream, no matter what the dose is or what the frequency is they can never get themselves to a threshold that makes consistent sense without the ratios being skewed in one way or the other, either too much estradiol, too much DHT. And because of the volatility of that, of testosterone transdermal cream, they can't stay in a reasonable place consistently. They're just in and out of windows. They get erections at between 4 and 7 p.m., and then no erections overnight, and then they get like one morning erection. But erections for sex are highly unpredictable. They try to make that consistent by staying around the same numbers by dosing the cream twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, and they still can't dial it in. Like, there's still a problem with it. So it's a lot more complex than, well, why wouldn't we just do daily cream because it mimics diurnal rhythm? You could say the same thing for test prop. Kind of mimics diurnal rhythm, good peak, good trough, but prop doesn't work for everybody. Prop doesn't work for everybody. How effective do you see tacotrenols work for you and your clients in improving lipids health management? For me, it's purely anecdotal, but I take tacotrenols. I also dose D-limonene, which is studied for this. And on 250 a test, my LDL is 109? So I'm 9 points over on 250 a test. I probably would be at a 130 if I wasn't taking the tacotrenols. Now, I don't have data to support that, but I do on cycle of 550, or does it 560 a week, where my lipids went, above range, particularly LDL and apolipoprotein B, which is not good. That's why you don't want to run cycles consistently without managing your bloods. So I would say that they are quite useful in the context of a regimen that is also conscious of making you healthy, eating well, which means a lot of vegetables. You can cheat and eat some saturated fat and kind of crappy foods, but ensure that you have days where you then go eat truly real food, rich in minerals and antioxidants. Yeah, those are the kind of things that you've got to do in conjunction with taking a pill for your thing. It's got to be a collaborative effort between your health and the things you're taking. How long can I run 130 test E and 100 Primo forever? Well, sure, you could, but again, this all depends on where your bloods go. Primo Bond, because it blocks estradiol, may have a negative effect on your lipids. So just continue to look at it. Otherwise, I do not think that phenylalanine is a dangerous drug to take. I think it is a very well studied, very old drug that has a lot of positive anabolic properties, and It's not particularly hair safe, but DHT derivatives and DHT itself aren't. So, it's one of those things. I think if it works for you and you manage your bloods and look at them and they're all in reasonable places, which would point to a healthy person, I think you really would have no problem running that for as long as you'd like to. What's my opinion on peptides, and is there any new groundbreaking news on nootropics? Nootropics. What would you say is a holy grail nootropic? Holy grail nootropic, they all do different things. Quite honestly, my favorite nootropics are aniracetam and oxiracetam, because this is anecdotal, but the memory IO improvement, which is like the ability to hold information in your head for longer and larger amounts of information. I don't know the mechanism for this. It's obviously cholinergically mediated, right? I mean, these things foster the release of acetylcholine at a higher frequency than your baseline. And some of them, like phenylpiracetam, actually modulate nicotinic acetylcholine receptor sites in positive fashion. So I really like aniracetam and oxiracetam for that reason. I think there's increased hippocampal cholinergic firing, which would indicate that your ability to store things into the memory, both short-term and long-term, would be enhanced while using aniracetam or oxiracetam. They're very comparable compounds. So those are like probably my favorites. Holy grail generally would just be modafinil. I mean, to be perfectly honest, nothing beats modafinil in terms of consistent energy. I mean, modafinil is effectively shutting off the tiredness response neurologically. It does this via a bunch of mechanisms, some DRI or dopamine reuptake inhibition, but mostly via orexin neurons. So modafinil is really the holy grail for taking a pill and feeling noticeably functional from it. At the same time, and there's all kinds of other ones like teacrine. I mean, caffeine is a wonderful nootropic, but teacrine is a really, really cool nootropic, right? It's like similar mechanisms of action to caffeine, but works on the adenosine receptors differently in a way which has a more pronounced, cleaner effect with less jitters than caffeine does. So, I mean, those are my opinions on nootropics. I've always been into tried and true, some of the newer research chemicals that have come out over the years, like PRL 853, pretty good, pretty powerful cholinergic nootropic, but, I'd pick aniracetam over it. The only research chemical that I am a huge fan of in the nootropic sphere is 9-methylbeta-carboline, which is 9-MEBC, and it is primarily a dopaminergic regenerative research chemical. Right, we saw the actual differentiation of dopaminergic neurons from the use of 9-MEBC in the scientific literature. So it's very, very cool stuff. Megatron Nemo, what's up, brother? I'm 3 injections into 70 every 4th day and 150 IU. Okay, so far my sense of well-being is holding up and getting a couple nocturnals a night. Okay, that's good. Libido isn't super strong yet. Yeah, I would keep letting it ride because you're nowhere near the steady state here. You got to get to about 6 weeks to determine what the hell's really going on. I would say if erections, if everything keeps going in the right direction regarding erections, yeah, definitely let it ride. Regarding libido, you're just going to have to give that a little bit of time too. Yeah, it may take time. You might get to the point where you've reached a good ratio of androgens to estradiol, therefore you've got reasonable erections. But the central nervous system side of libido, you're never going to reach on that dose. Maybe, who knows? You might be totally fine, but you might need to increase the dose or decrease the frequency in total. Figure out if that HCG is actually sensical for you. I don't know if you're doing that every 4th day or not, but if you are, maybe just once a week would be better. Maybe you need slightly higher HCG. This all really depends on where the estradiol goes. I would look at the estradiol. I mean, if it's unreasonably low, then you probably need to increase it to get the libido going. I mean, the bottom line with estradiol and libido and TRT is that it's such a fine line usually. The higher you go on androgens, the more you can kind of float the estrogen higher and the more that window kind of widens a little bit. But the effective operative construct now is that Too little estradiol, libido is going to go south. Erections should be fine as long as you have enough DHT. Too high estradiol, erections start to go south no matter how much DHT you have, generally speaking. And there is a sweet spot in the DHT estrogen ratio where everything works, right? But a lot of people blow past that sweet spot and have a hard time staying there. So it's either they have good erections and not much libido, or they have great libido and not good erections. You've got to find that right balance, and there is a balance for everybody. Hopefully you get there, but yeah, I'd give it time at this point. By what mechanism can extremely high androgens cause ED if estrogen is controlled? And balancing the androgens to estrogens, yeah, that would be my first suggestion. Listen, people don't know this because we traditionally talk about it from the other side, but excessively high androgens without enough supportive estradiol can absolutely give you erectile dysfunction. This is pretty much what happens when you crash estrogen with an AI. You've got a good degree of androgens, even if you're on 140 a week, but the estrogen's sitting at 12. Now, estrogen is one of those things where it helps to a certain point, after which it's problematic and before which it's problematic typically. But definitely you can have too much DHT and too much androgens and not enough estradiol. The guys that under aromatize, and such people exist, have libido problems. Their erections usually work fine, but they've got libido problems because estradiol does modulate the limbic system of the brain. And the local conversion of testosterone in the brain is a big driver of libido. So, that could be it. At the same time, you're implying estrogen is controlled. So taking things that control estrogen, if the doses aren't right on what I presumably are aromatase inhibitors or DHT derivatives, you're going to absolutely fucking give yourself ED. Yeah. Aromatase inhibitors, Primo, Masteron can absolutely kill your dick if it's not dosed correctly. Doesn't mean they're bad to take. It means, you're messing with your hormones. The balance has to be straight. It'd be nice if we could just load up on tests and control the E2 and have amazing EQ. But what it looks like, and again, I don't know everything about TRT. We're all still learning here. But what it looks like is that if you've got loads of androgens, you're going to need a little more estradiol to support that, to support the balance, a healthy balance. Have I worked with any type 2 diabetics? What protocols seem to help them the most? No, not a doctor. A trace, or it's just not my specialty. I'd go for one cycle with DHT-E for more masculine development in general. How long would you run a cycle? And what's your opinion on 50 milligrams a week to be safe? That's reasonable. That's reasonable. Yeah, if you get the 20% dropper, it's about 7 milligrams of DHT per drop. This is the 20% transdermal DHT gel. So, running that 7 days a week would be 49 milligrams a week. So you'd be basically right there. I think it's reasonable. Just be careful not to crush the estrogen because it has the ability to do that, at least at the signaling level, not the serum level. I'm a kratom user who is worried about high prolactin. I would be too. Trying to quit, but in the meantime, will P5P and Mucuna still help lower it? Potentially. But this is the problem with any opioid. We're talking about an opioid receptor agonist. If you agonize the opioid receptors, you block D2 receptors. And, listen, the only thing preventing your prolactin from going out of range, and the only thing preventing your lactotropes, these are the cells on the pituitary that secrete prolactin, from multiplying, well, there's a couple things that might cause them to multiply, fucking endocrine neoplasia and stuff like that, but is generally, though, dopamine D2 receptors that sit on the pituitary. So if you're blocking them via taking opioid receptor agonists, then yes, your prolactin is going to go up, and P5P Mucuna may not solve that problem. Yeah, you'd be looking at more potent prolactin reducing compounds, which supply essentially the substrate to bind to the dopamine D2 receptors, i.e. cabergoline or bromocriptine. Best TRT protocol for brain power include high DHT? Yeah, generally. The only thing I can comment on regarding that is that the higher a person generally goes on testosterone, the more productive and more nootropic like they're going to feel. There's a ton of great things that happen via happen to the brain with higher levels of androgens. If you can get yourself to tolerate that, then that's a really good thing. Guys, I have got to quick run to my door and someone is knocking on it, so I'll be right back. Hey, false alarm. It was my neighbor's door. That's fucking weird, dude. That sounded like it was my door. Okay, have you seen Dr. Keith Nichols' lecture on testosterone beliefs for science? Yeah, I've watched it several times. Yeah, I've watched it. I've watched every part of it. I don't know if you're asking me what I think about it, but look, I mean, I think this again. Nichols definitely has a dog in this fight. One of them is that he used selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and developed post-testosterone sexual dysfunction. Right. So a lot of the video, a lot of the lecture is saying, all right, number one, aromatase inhibitors were never proven to be, necessary in the scientific literature, which is actually true. The literature doesn't suggest that we have to use them or they're necessary. So it's kind of an argument no one's making. Like, no one's making that argument. So it's one of those things where you're sort of arguing with nobody. Secondarily, though, a large degree of the discussion was about the real cause of erectile difficulties and libido dysfunction on testosterone replacement therapy, which the doc kind of scapegoats serotonin as like the leading cause via the receptor expression, the increases in serotonin that take place both in response to testosterone and estradiol. And that is the major point that he's trying to get across, in addition to this strangely pompous idea that anyone besides medical doctors talking about TRT should not be talking about TRT. That camp, especially him, tends to use the word misinformation a lot while espousing it. Like, he tried to draw a correlation between the obvious modulation of serotonin from testosterone and estradiol on TRT and then serotonin being the cause of sexual dysfunction, while maintaining that, essentially maintaining like you're an asshole if you don't operate from the scientific literature. But that was a big jump that he made. I saw and read the literature that he was pointing to, which he is concluding proves conclusively that serotonin is the cause of sexual dysfunction on TRT. And nowhere in any piece of any of that literature, nowhere does it conclusively prove that, nor suggest it. He's merely making a correlation. He's just doing a point A to point B in a way which supports what looks like to me a bias, which is based on his own N=1, which is a huge mistake for a doctor to do, which is his experience using selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which caused sexual dysfunction. Do you see how flawed that is? It's extremely flawed. Now, at the same time, I've learned with that guy specifically just to live and let live kind of thing. Because otherwise, those guys are just going to attack you. Like Keith has been in my comment section and just attacking me over and over. And some of you guys, commenters, responded to Keith and tried to put him in his place and were a little aggressive with him. I then, even though I appreciate that, announced to the channel, hey, look, he's a doctor. If you can agree with him or not agree with him, if he comes on the channel and says one thing or the other, just treat him respectfully, please. I then followed up and called his clinic and told him that. And I apologize for like some of my users, some of you aggressive guys in the comment section that were, disparaging him and stuff, because I think we should keep it fucking respectful here. And then he wrote me this big long email lecture about the serotonin thing. And then I tried to respond to it and my email was blocked. it's like, okay, man. I mean, honestly, I don't have a whole lot of time for what's going on over there, other than to say, and potentially I'll do some content on this, but I just haven't gotten to it because it's not very high in my hierarchy of priorities right now in my life. But you know, the idea that serotonin is the cause of sexual dysfunction on TRT is wrong. Yeah, that's wrong. That's wrong. And if anyone is questioning whether or not that is wrong, here's what you do. You go on the internet and you find yourself a serotonin receptor antagonist. In my nootropics days, I think this is one of the reasons guys like this heavily underestimate me, and I find it a little bit humoring, but like largely just annoying. I have taken serotonin receptor antagonists, so I know what they are and how to get them. Go buy some cyproheptadine. It's a drug called cyproheptadine. You can get it in a dropper, and you drop a little bit under your tongue to get, you know, absorption, better blood vessel absorption. You know, I forget the dose exactly, but it is a very, very strong serotonin receptor antagonist. I think it's a mild cholinergic receptor antagonist as well. So it can absolutely make you a little drowsy, but thereby you're going to be blocking serotonergic signaling. And if you have sexual dysfunction on TRT and you think it's serotonin because doc said so based on his bias from taking SSRIs and having sexual dysfunction as a result of that, and drawing very weak correlations in the literature between testosterone, estradiol, and serotonin, and concluding while saying, hey, we should be following science, and anyone that doesn't is an asshole. But I'm going to make a conclusion that is nowhere near conclusive in the science. If you're curious about that, just take a serotonin receptor antagonist. And when the sexual function problem doesn't resolve, you will have proven the theory wrong. The thing that these guys also don't know about me is that I already, this is why I just don't get, you know, why these guys don't recognize what I've been up to for the last 16 years. I already proved that wrong 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I proved that wrong. Why are we even talking about this now? Now there's a lecture that serotonin's the largest driver of the sexual dysfunction on TRT. I proved this wrong and never talked about it publicly, but I've worked with men in the trenches with sexual dysfunction for a long time. And serotonin receptor antagonists were actually one of the things that I used in these contexts, and they didn't permanently restore sexual function. They didn't. In the context of TRT. You know, I honestly think this. I respect doc, and I respect a lot of doctors that maybe have their hand in TRT, but quite honestly, there has been a new, you know, over the last 20 years, there is a new wave of younger, more cutting edge, highly intelligent biohackers that look at things from a different perspective. And I think a lot of these guys with their positions are a little bit in over their heads, honestly. And I'd be happy to debate anybody at any given time live with zero preparation on any of this stuff. So yeah, take some cyproheptadine. You'll prove that theory wrong right away. Right away. And you'll recognize it's just coming from bias and also the pro-estrogen bias. Do I know anything about ATX 304? I'm curious if it could have any positive, negative effects on hormones. I know nothing about what that is, brother. No idea. It looks pretty cool. Was it a nootropic? Hey, brother, in your opinion, the best protocol for prop and cream? It's too general of a question, man. Yeah. I mean, prop is best dose if you don't want to control estrogen at like 20 to 30 milligrams a day. Cream, cream is hard to dial in. The 100 milligram per milliliter cream, in my opinion, is better to start with because it's kind of on the lower end, but you'll get a lot of DHT. So 5 clicks of that in the morning. I'm not a huge fan of splitting it up into morning and afternoon, or morning and evening rather, on cream. People can make the 200 milligram cream work, but it's usually best dosed lower. At 3 pumps in the morning and not 2 and 2. And, but all kinds of things work in those cases, like testosterone propionate. I've seen, and this isn't applicable to everyone, obviously nothing is, but I've seen protocols like 80 to 100 milligrams every third day be really, really good for everything. You know, it's just enough of peak and trough. The estrogen doesn't stay super elevated. You get some trough time, but the massive peak in androgens, how quickly it happens, makes people feel really good and function very well sexually. Not everybody. Michael says, my hematocrit went from 46 pre-TRT to 49 at 77 milligrams a week. Every other day injections, that's probably a big reason. You don't have any trough at all. Switch to 128 every 3.5 days. Want to go higher, but with hematocrit go too high? We don't know. Nobody knows your blood at this point. But generally speaking, if you are exposed steady state to androgens, you're going to have higher hematocrit. Whereas if you have a peak and a subsequent trough, the hematocrit doesn't have the opportunity based on if you actually understand how red blood cell creation works and therefore how H&H rise over a slow period of time. It actually makes a lot more scientific sense that a peak and trough would foster a lower hematocrit state than constant steady state androgens. Probably you're going to find every 3.5 days might not be enough of a gapped out frequency for you. But I think you'd find if you went to every 4th or 5th day or every 7th day that the hematocrit would eventually just slowly over time lower. What about prop blends? This is a good question for daily injections. The only one that I know of is the Cypionate prop blend, which is, I think it's, 160 to 40 milligrams per milliliter. So if you inject 200 milligrams, you're getting 160 of Cypionate and 40 milligrams of prop. I don't think it's particularly useful because that 40 of prop is out in 2 days, essentially. And then you're just left with the Cypionate, right? So in that case, it actually makes a little more sense to inject more frequently and see if you can make it work. Yeah. Like something like 60 milligrams every other day with the 160 to 40 Cypionate prop makes a lot more sense. I've never tested that and I don't know how that would work, but that would be a good starting point. You moved away from daily prop. Why? I did not move away from daily prop. I didn't move away from daily prop. No. I still think daily prop is an amazing idea. It's a great ester. It saves people from being able to, it allows people to actually feel their testosterone in terms of the sexual function for the first time ever. Now, listen, they can dial in on their Cypionate or anything, but getting a quick peak and how prop tends to situate the ratios between DHT and estradiol just tends to work without a whole lot of intervention, without a whole lot of protocol manipulation for people. So I think it's useful in that regard. For me, though, I've explained this many times. I'm not very anabolic on test prop. I'm not. Nor am I very anabolic on testosterone cream, And that was something for me that, over the last 6 months, I changed, moving from fast-acting testosterone to back to Cypionate at higher doses, strictly for anabolism. I do that almost every summer. Last summer, I took a break. In the summer before, it was a cycle of testosterone. So you're going to see me do that pretty much every summer. Now, I can dial in on pretty much anything, but there are pros and cons. There's really not a whole lot of cons for me at the moment on testosterone Cypionate, other than I don't get that dopaminergic peak I would on prop, but that's fine. I could just drink coffee or take nootropics or whatever, do nothing, and I still feel fine. But there are cons for me for prop, and the predominant one is I am just not very anabolic. I think a good degree of that is driven by less nitrogen retention. In doses of 25 to 100 milligrams of caffeine daily, would you say there's a risk for hurting libido erections? No, not enough vasoconstriction, if that's what you're alluding to. No, but I would say that if the thing you want to look out for in terms of things hurting erections that you may do daily is nicotine. Yeah. It's profoundly vasoconstrictive. It just constricts your blood vessels. There's even some anecdotal evidence to suggest the idea that chronic nicotine use tends to degenerate certain, I'll put it this way, people end up having disc pain and neck pain that seems to be dose dependent, but that scales upward with their use of nicotine. And when they cease the nicotine, all of it goes away. Something to think about. But yeah, no, regarding erection quality, nicotine is the vasoconstrictor to be concerned about. I think everybody has a threshold. You go above that threshold, erections are going to start being worse. If you're a chronic vapor of high nicotine concentration, like anything above 6 milligrams per milliliter in vape juice, and you're chronically chain vaping, you're probably going to have erectile dysfunction. Yeah. I mean, you can go study the forums because the people in the quit vaping and the quit smoking subreddits unanimously report improvements in erectile function after reducing or eliminating nicotine. So it isn't the coffee you've got to worry about, my friend. It's the nicotine. Not joshing around with PSSD, the sentiment still seems to be test HCG and estrogen control. I've tried different doses and still can't recover. Tried pramipexole and that was hell. Yeah, dopamine agonism is not your solution here. Still can't recover pleasurable orgasms. Well, if you're controlling estrogen, that could be why. Again, and it's not that everybody needs to control estrogen that has PSSD. It's not that everyone needs to control estrogen on TRT. You've got to figure out if you're one of those people or aren't one of those people. You know, and I've talked about the nuances that describe each state, whether you should lower the estrogen a little bit or whether you need more of it or whether you should leave it alone. It seems to be variable and there is no one size fits all. I mean, it's ridiculous to assume that there is. So based on the variation of people's physiology. So no, not everyone has to control estrogen. You know, if you can't, one of the main side effects of blocking estrogen too heavily is you don't have good orgasms, you know, and you don't have libido. Yeah. If you're doing all of it, first of all, I don't know your dosage, so I can't really help you, nor your frequency at all. So it's way more detailed than the general test HCG and estrogen, and you're not having success. I would need to know your doses and your frequency. But if I were you, what I would try first is I'd try 200 milligrams a week. I would run a maintenance dose every 7 days of 100 IU of HCG. I'd run that really at any time. You could do it the day after injection. You could do it the third day. Whatever you prefer, just to keep the testicles functional. You don't want to add extra estradiol from the HCG because that's what it'll do. It's a profoundly estrogenic chemical. And do nothing for 5-6 weeks and see if that improves. At that point, the same principle applies. Like, find enough testosterone where you cross your androgenic threshold and then dial in estrogen if libido is not firing on all cylinders. Estrogen and injection frequency at that point. Again, as I said in the beginning, boys, the discount on 50% coaching. So you can get 3 and 6 month coaching with me, 50% discounted right now. That ends tomorrow. That ends Sunday. That's not me telling you it's going to end so that we can get you on board and then we extend it. We're not extending it. I'm not extending it. So the 50% discount for 3 and 6 month coaching ends tomorrow. The code is 50 now. It is in the description of this video. It should also be present on the actual coaching page at livecortex.com. That discount ends tomorrow. We've booked too many people. We've booked enough people where I can't keep the discount. And that's what happens every time. We won't run that discount for at least another 9 months, probably the spring. So if you think about getting on board, you have literally till tomorrow at 11:59 Eastern time to pull the trigger on the 50% coaching. Consulting's still going to be there. So, okay, if it isn't a big deal to you, just don't get it and do some consults with me if you need to. But the longer one-on-one coaching is where we get the hardcore libido and erection issues solved, stuff that can't be solved in a one-off call necessarily, and stuff, you know, where people have had significant problems for a long period of time dialing in the erections and the libido on TRT. Otherwise, boys, much more content coming soon. I've got to hit the gym or take a walk. I got to decide what I want to do and get to the day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I hope you guys have a fucking great weekend. I hope you're safe. You don't drink too much. You eat well. You sleep well. You have fun. You be happy and you enjoy life. I will see you guys Monday and all this week for content. So look forward to it. I can't wait to see you guys there. And, well, I got a lot of new questions in the last little bit. Holy shit. Wow. Yeah, the 50 applies to Affirm. Yeah, you can use that. You can use it. You can use the coupon code and then pay with Affirm. Shout out to Ryan for the help and insight. Like the video, y'all. Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate that. Arnold says, went to 160 milligrams every 4 days, inching up slowly. How long before each increment should I wait? 6 weeks. A laughable moment on Keith Nichols had some nice words for you. On a laughable moment, Keith Nichols had some nice words for me. I guess I didn't see that. I think the guy, for some fucking reason, has it out for me. Again, I think he's super emotionally charged on his position. And I also think that, you know, guys like that have a real hard time believing that, you know, a non-medical doctor can be highly versed in endocrine physiology. I think it's just they can't, for some reason it doesn't compute for them. They're used to seeing, you know, either two ends of the extreme. You're either a car salesman guy, in which case, you know, you're full of shit and you're a scammer, or you're a strictly boring intellect, but never both. So when they see a hybrid, a guy who is capable of devouring the scientific literature and understanding what it is that I'm reading, but also has verbal fluency and is extroverted, it confuses them. But that's fine. I've been mischaracterized and misunderstood my entire life. I am not a very typical person. There are not many people like me out there, but you see them every now and then. Maybe I missed it. If you don't want to touch it, but thoughts on the new news with Fauci? I don't really care at this point. I don't think it should be. Maybe YouTube is over, or the social companies are over trying to censor people's speech at this point. I mean, I don't know. But I have caught screenshots, like I've caught like thumbnails and shit. I mean, I know he's being grilled by some of the conservative congressmen, so I will have to look into it. New Boy Fitz. Who took shots at me? Are we talking about Keith Nichols again? He took shots at you, as I'm sure you're aware, but damn, your immediate and deep recall on the points of his lecture is insane. That proves you're way more qualified than he ever gives you shit for. Yeah, I watched the whole thing a couple times. Again, just listen to what I said about serotonin. Block the serotonin receptors, and you'll prove the theory wrong. You know, and consider why Doc has that theory to begin with. It's his N=1 bias. Is that not enough of a disqualifying factor of a lecture? It's purely disqualifying. Regarding taking shots at me, no, I'm not aware of that. Is there a new Dr. Keith Nichols taking shots at me? I wouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, again, I left a very cordial, very apologetic message on his practice's answering machine saying, hey, you know, I'm sorry that my commenters in my channel were, you know, responding aggressively to you. I'll make sure they don't do that. I really don't know what's up with that guy, honestly. I wish him the best. I wish some of these folks that, you know, have something to say a happier life. And, you know, I can only hope that I am less mischaracterized, but people are going to think what they think without talking to you. And that's the unfortunate truth about human behavior. Somebody asked Doc, how is it possible that bodybuilders get gyno if the principles that E2 receptor saturating going over isn't relevant? He crashed out and said abuse isn't TRT. Right. So in other words, he diverted from the question and didn't actually answer the question. Instead, referred to the problem as, well, once it gets out of this threshold of TRT, our principles either don't apply or we're not going to address that. Yeah, it's a great way to just deviate from the question. You're awesome, man. Keep the Q&A vids going. This shit is gold. Abso-fucking-lutely. ADHD are here. I drink a full pot of coffee and a double shot of espresso every day. I think you're okay. Yeah, I think so. Jesus. How much caffeine is that? All right, boys. Great fucking questions. Thanks for being here. Oh, yeah, here we go. What do we got? Oh, yeah. He and Man Medicine did an entire video developed to taking shots at me? Man Medicine? That's a bummer. I actually like that guy. Or, I mean, I've liked a few pieces of content that he put out. And some chiropractor who talks about TRT and stuff on YouTube. It was super targeted. No, I did not see that. So who's he? Dr. Nichols? And Man Medicine did a video devoted to taking shots at me. I've not seen that. No, I'm been very busy this whole last week with coaching and living my life, but that's unfortunate. Man Medicine, yeah, that's a bummer. I actually like that guy, or I think a lot of his content is pretty cool. Some of what he does, I don't agree with. I mean, the guy takes exogenous estradiol, but are you sure that guy was taking shots at me? I'll have to check it out, you know. But again, I mean, I am okay with being misunderstood and mischaracterized. It's been like that my entire life. I've taken a very different route, you know, rather than pursue the route of getting a degree in the medical orthodoxy. I instead decided to get a general education diploma and join the United States military, serve as a 19 Delta, stateside and overseas in war. I fought in the Iraq War, and I left the military a decorated war veteran. After which, after looking at the economic conditions in 2008, which is when I got out of the United States Army, I decided that entrepreneurship was a better path than using the GI Bill to go to college. That was my personal choice. So, I mean, that's just kind of how things ended up. And therefore, the idea that I'm talking about physiology, I get the implication, at least from Doc Nichols, is there's some sort of undertone that I'm not qualified to be talking about this, as if my capacity to understand the literature that I am looking at, which spans at this point about 17 years, is somehow extremely limited, which would imply that I have a learning disability, which I do not. So I don't know. Maybe I'll check it out, but I mean, these days I'm not really interested in going back and forth with people. If anyone wants to get me on a podcast, I mean, I'll debate any singular person on the web with zero preparation. You can get them on now, and then you can bring the next person that has something to say about me. I will debate them all in one night with fucking no piss breaks and no fucking water. Bring it on. But no, I did not see it, but I think it's funny. It's just like, what? Why? It's just like, go do your thing, go do your thing, please. And in the end, it really comes down to what your advice is regarding who's right or who's wrong. Let people and their execution of your advice speak for itself. Because when their defectors come my way with ED, it already does speak for itself. I'll end on that. Hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk to you this week for content. Be there, be square. Sub to the channel, like the video, makes a huge difference. Peace, my brothers. Later.